Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming live from Sun City in Arizona. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, episode 1379, Tips for Researching Marriage Records. My apologies for being late. I was researching marriage records. Actually, no, I was researching a lineage is what I was doing. There's a really cool relationship finder, relation finder, I think it is. And it's done through familysearch.org, and you put in the code that they have next to the name on the website in your family tree, and you can masquerade as that person, and it shows you all these famous people that you're related to, whether they were, royalty, presidents, first ladies, the Mayflower, entertainment, astronauts, and a whole bunch of other there's a whole bunch of categories. And so I've been curious about one line, so I started doing some research on that and thinking, let's see where we can go with this, just doing by a quick glance, and I kind of lost track of time. Which, when it comes to genealogy, Helen has to remember to put on her timer, or she goes, or she's late. So I apologize. But anyway, tips for researching marriage records. Oh my gosh, I love researching marriage records. Why, Helen? Why do you love researching marriage records? Because you can find out all sorts of cool stuff. Now, marriage records will show the groom's name, the bride's name. It may show their age. It could just say of age or full age. If they're under a certain age, it might say their age. And if they're under that age, then there will be somewhere on the document that it shows that parental consent has been given. I've come across a few of those. It may show the full name of the father and his, on the bride and groom, it will show their name, their age, and it may just say full age or of age. It will show where they're currently living. It may show where they're currently living. It may show their occupation. It may show their father's name and occupation. On some, it will show the mother and her maiden name. Not always. And sometimes you get the certificate, which has all the information. Oh, and you'll also, in the marriage record too, there'll be the signatures of the witnesses as well, which is very key, because some of those witnesses could be siblings or relatives of some kind. So it helps you further, especially if you've got the same last name, then you're like thinking, where do they fit into the tree? So you can find relatives that way too. Even the name of the person who married them. Was it a friend of the family? Was it a registrar? Was it or a judge? Or was it a member of their family that married them? And it will show the location. So did they get married in a church? Did they get married in somebody's house, in the backyard, in the field, in the back of beyond? So it will show those. It shows all kinds of sorts of details as well. And it'll have, of course, have the date of the wedding as well. Now, you have to be careful when you're looking at marriage records. You may end up finding the marriage license, which shows they applied for the license, but it may not, and the intended wedding date, but it may not actually have a marriage certificate, a marriage registered. So they may have the license, but can you find the record that shows they actually got married? Now, in some books, when you're looking at them, they have the marriage license at the top, and underneath is the confirmation that they were married, is their marriage register record. In the license information, you're going to find more information there about the person, their age, their parents, that sort of stuff as well, if that information is there. Parish records, some of the older parish records would literally get their fountain pen, their quill, and write pages or paragraphs about the couple. Who are they? What do they do? Where do they live? Where are they living? Who are their parents? What are their parents' occupation? All of that. So marriage records are really, really cool. So you've got parish records, which is basically written in a thing. You also have the log books or the indexes, which is just listing the groom's name and his information, and the groom's and the bride, and it could be on two separate lines. There was one that I looked up. When was I looking that one up? Oh yeah, there was one I was looking up, and it happened to be the last entry in the registrar, and it basically went across. And this registrar, I hadn't seen this format before. So it had the groom's name, it had his age, it had his residence, his occupation, his father's name and occupation, the mother's name with her maiden name, the date they got married, and there was something else on there. It was a parish, and then the very next line underneath the groom's name was the bride's information, which was really cool. Oh, yeah, where they were born was the other one that was on there, where they were born. So it gave you quite a bit more information. I was like, oh, this doesn't actually, but this was a marriage register. So this is people who had actually gotten married, and it had the wedding date on there. And on some of them, it had little notations and things like that the person who married, and then of course was the name of the person who married them. And they also had. They had the witnesses, and yes, they had the witnesses listed on that too. It was a 2-page spread in this big book, and I saw the images of it. It was pretty cool. You can request, when you find the information and stuff, you can request copies of certificates, and they will put that information into a certificate form for you and send it to you. There are fees associated with those. Now, in some places, marriage records you cannot get unless the marriage took place 80 years ago. Some are 50. No. Oh, hang on, if I come across the net 50. Some are less. I have found marriage records for people that have been married under 50 years. It depends on the state. It depends on, remember when we're talking about birth things, we're talking about being held in the church records or the parish records. You had the town law, the county law, the territory law, the district law, the state law, the province law, the territory law, whatever one the country law, whatever one they fell under is what the records were. And some states here in the United States did not require people to start registering marriages until like the early 1900s. I was surprised at how late some of the states required things like birth, deaths, and marriages to be actually officially registered. Now, they may be in the church records because it's an event that happened at the church. But as far as registering it with government officials and things, some of them were the early 1900s. And I'm just like, really? Wow, that really did surprise me. But you can find all sorts of great information on there. So when you're looking, you're either going to find the license, you're going to find them in an index, you may find the actual marriage certificate, or the information, the actual record of the actual marriage taking place. You may even find the banns. Now, in some churches and some religions, they required banns to be read, which was an announcement that this couple intended to get married on such and such a date. And the banns had to be read out like 3 weeks in a row. And they were actually recorded. I know in the English ones, they were recorded in registers. But of course, it doesn't state whether or not the marriage took place. It just records the banns that were read, and it had the groom's name on there, the bride's name on there, the date they intended to get married, where they were going to be living after they got married, what his occupation was, what her occupation was, are they of age? And I think that was about it. I don't think I got much more than that in there. But then you had to go, okay, you got the banns for 3 weeks, and you may have 3 weeks in a row, but where's the record of their marriage? So the intent was there. Did they get married? So there is a lot of questions that can be raised with marriage records, especially the older ones where you can find the banns, you can find the licenses, you can find the registration the marriage actually took place. You can find those in parish records. Government records are a little different, but they have the license in there as well. You can also go to newspapers for marriage announcements. You may find the engagement notices in the paper. A lot of times they have an article about the wedding, describing what the bride was wearing, who the bridesmaids were. Was the matron of honor or the maid of honor related to how were they related to the bride, and what kind of dress were they wearing? What was the material they were made out of? And the same for the bridesmaids information. Is this a friend? Is it a cousin? Is it a sister? Is it a relative? Is it a sister-in-law to be? Is it a sister of the groom? All this sort of thing. Then it went over the groom and what he was wearing and all of his best man, the information about the best man and each of the groomsmen that were there, the names of the ushers, the names of the flower girls, the names of the page boys. All of that information would be written up in an article. And then it may even go on to to list all of the guests as well. in some articles. And the higher up you were in the social ladder, the bigger the article. And most marriages were reported that way. Some you would just see, these are the people here who applied for a marriage license. So you knew when they applied for the marriage license, and now you go start looking for the marriage record of the actual marriage taking place. And yes, you did have those in there. There was engagement announcements that were put into newspapers as well. So there's many places that you can go look: parish records, church records, town records, whatever the law was at the time. Remember, when you're looking at counties, look for county maps around the time that they got married. So you know, because especially if it's close to a border area of another county, they may have moved the county lines. They may have got married, and then afterwards they moved the county lines. So you think that this town here is part of this county, but when they got married, it was actually part of this county. So there's things that you got to go and look for like that as well. Let's see, what else have I got on my little list here? And using the wiki search within FamilySearch.org helps you too, because you can get down to county levels, town levels, parish levels, that sort of thing on their records, and it will tell you where those records were kept up to a certain time and then beyond. Some places do not have restrictions on, if you want to find their marriage certificate, you can find their marriage certificate. Others will have year restrictions on, like, I know New Zealand, you can't look for marriage certificates for unless the marriage took place at least 80 years ago. And I know that there was one that we were actually, we sat there and we waited and we waited and we waited. There was one that we were actually looking for because we were curious to see how this person had put their name on the marriage certificate. And because there's a lot of questions about this person in our family, and a lot of mystery about this person as well. And so we waited and waited and waited, and I knew when his wedding was, and so the day after his 80th wedding anniversary, so it would have been 80 years plus 1 day, although I probably could have gone on the day before since New Zealand's a day ahead of us. I think my mum was actually with us at the time. So this was 2014, I think it was. Maybe it might have been a little later. Yeah, 2014. I think it was 2014. Yeah, that would have been right, because it would have been 80 years, yeah. And so she happened to be staying with us at the time, and so I knew this date had arrived. And so I quickly went in and had a look, found it. Actually, no, I found it before my parents came over, and when they came over, I actually had a physical copy of it. Because by then I had gone and ordered a copy of the certificate, had it sent to me here in the States, and so when they came over here, I was able to show her the record. And so that started off a whole another bunch of questions and everything else when we found out what name he'd been given, the name that he was born with was not the name he got married with. So it started off a whole bunch of other questions. So yes, you've also got, so I said you got marriage licenses, certificates, announcements in the newspaper, church records, which announce banns for those that have to do banns. And I think it was like 3 weeks in a row they had to be announced, 3 weeks before the wedding. And this way the banns were notifying all the people in the church that this couple was intending to get married. So if anybody had anything against any reason why they should not get married, they had time to either prepare it or go and see them beforehand, or interrupt the service at that point when the leader would turn around and go, does anybody have any reason why these two should not be wed? They could pop up and go, yeah, we do. Pop, 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 pop. So yeah. So determine also where the marriage may have occurred. Be specific with town, city, state, county, country, parish, all that sort of good stuff. Determine the repository or repositories where the marriage records may be held. Is it in the local archives, the state archives, the county courthouse, online databases? Usually if you're searching online, in the source information underneath, it will tell you where those records are held. If you're on something like FamilySearch.org, they may tell you where you can find this information, but they can't show you the information because of copyright. But they can't scan the record so you can see the image. You actually have to go in person to the library in Salt Lake City to actually see the physical record, because of copyright they cannot scan it and put it online. They may have an index up there so that you can find the record. You can find what volume it's in, what page number it's on, that sort of information. So, just be aware of that if you can't find an image, it could be that it hasn't been scanned because of copyright reasons. So look for an index to see if that's there as well. Because the information could be there as far as the index goes, just shows that, John Smith married Mary Brown and in this particular year. And you go, well, yeah, that could be them, may not be them, but, might be worth a trip. Or finding a genealogist who lives in that area that can go and look it up for you. Check with your, local historical or genealogical societies as well and see what records that they have. As we talked about yesterday, there are people who have a ton of records or have some records and nobody in the family wants them, so they send them to a local historic or genealogy society where they preserve them, scan them, archive them, that sort of thing as well. I remember on Genealogy Roadshow, they were in, I think it was Boston. They were in Boston, and it was like the New England Family Historical Society or something and they took us into the back rooms to show us there, and they said this is stuff that has been items that have been sent to them for cataloging. And they even pointed down at this old battered leather suitcase. Even the suitcase had been catalogued. It had stickers all over of where these people had been, and they had the history of the suitcase, who owned it, and that sort of thing too. So because the suitcase told its own story. They said they even catalogued the containers that the information arrives in, because it could be that they may not have room on the shelves for it, so they keep it in that area, in its original, in the container it arrived in, or whatever. They archive everything and make sure everything is archive safe. And so it's another way that if you've got family members who would rather just scan everything, and then I've heard of this, would like to just, let's just scan everything and toss the rest and toss them. It's like, no. If you've got family members that want to do that, go ahead and do the scanning and then send the records to your local historical society or genealogy society. And you can even call them and ask them and say, hey, I've got these records. Nobody in my family, they just want me to scan them and then toss the paper copies. I have the paper copies. Where can I send them to where they can archive them and scan them and keep them online for those that want to look at them in future generations? And they will give you the best repository to send it to. If it's not them, they will tell you where the best place is to send that information. So there are some hints and tips about looking for marriage records. Remember, they come in all sorts of different forms and shapes. And you'll also find them in family Bibles as well. Those family Bibles where they kept track of everything. Births, deaths, marriages, everything. It's all in there, the family tree. Somebody gets married in, they get put into the tree. They get put into the family Bible. Are there other places? Sorry, bit of popcorn husk. So when you're looking at the records and things, when you're looking for records, what places have you found records in? You may find them in a file folder in a filing cabinet. You may find them in a box of papers in the house that you've inherited from some relative. I have boxes currently in storage with all of my mother-in-law's research, and I can't wait to get those boxes out and get them sent off so somebody can do all the scanning for me, because there is a lot of documentation in there. And I'm looking forward to getting all of that scanned and electronic, and then attaching all those images to the right places within the family tree as well, so that that will satisfy. And then that way too, I can then send once everything's scanned and everything looks good, we've verified everything, we can then send all that documentation off to one of the local historical societies or genealogical societies and have them archive the records. And I want to make sure that none of that gets lost, because there are some documents which I suspect may be the only copies in the world, because these people arrived in the United States with marriage, birth, and death certificates from countries that they fled from. So they may have bought the only copy of those documents, and it's all written in the language of the countries that they came from. So I need to find translators for those. Google Translate, and I will tell you this, the Google Translator will take you so far in translation. It won't get you all the way. In fact, I actually was speaking to somebody who speaks Spanish, And I was telling him about some documents in Mexico that I had to transcribe. And I said, I got the gist of the main words, so I knew how it was written out. And so I could just go and look for those phrases in the thing. And he turns around and says, well, he was actually doing some translations and stuff. And there was a couple of places where there was a couple of words he wasn't sure about going from Spanish to English. And he said he would put stuff in there and it would convert it to English and he'd just copy and paste it. And he said it was actually he said since it first started, it actually does a really good job. Is it 100%? No. But it's a lot better than it used to be. So if you have documents in a foreign language and you're able to decipher the script, especially if it's like cursive writing, using real letters, not the symbols that the Cyrillics that some country uses. Make sure it's in a form that you can see the letters and type them in. Then the Google Translate will do a pretty good job of translating that for you. So at least you know where the key phrases are. And so if you're scanning multiple documents and I had to do this one time for a client when I was researching in Mexico, I thought, okay, today we're looking at birth records for these people. And we'll go and find those birth records. And knowing the key phrases I had to look, I got into a rhythm with that pattern that I could open the document, I could check through to see these are the key phrases I'm looking for. Are they there? No. Go on, and then I'll read it a little slow to make sure because I can't read Spanish. And again, looking for those key phrases. That would be across the board in these different things. So when you get the key phrases down and you know what they look like in script, because they had some of them had gorgeous penmanship, where they had written it with a quill, and the writing was it was superb. It was great to read, and some you could tell had hurried it, and you're trying to figure out, is it an O or an E or an A? What letter is that? Or is it a circle? And then there's a line over here. So is that actually a D? That they've done the circle here, but they've done the upright over here. So you're learning to read. There's actually books out there that you can use that shows you how to read how to decipher handwriting from different eras, which is brilliant. That was actually part of one of the courses I did a couple of years ago. We actually got pieces we had to transcribe, and that was interesting. And was like, how did you get? And because in some cases, an S, they actually went up to the top and came down again, and then came. So it might have looked like a lowercase f, but it was actually an S. So knowing things like that when you're reading from that particular period, if you're looking at that and you're wondering, is that a P? Is it an F? It could be an S. You don't know. But anyway, I'm out of here. Go have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here at 6 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Hey, konara.